Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. On today's program, I will be covering the second half of the Preacher series finale season premiere, this being the episode 2 titled The Last Supper. And of course, as always, just to forewarn you guys, this video will contain spoilers to this episode. So if you are not caught up on the show at this point, well, as I stated in my previous video, you might want to exit stage left and save this video for another date. However, if you do not mind the spoilers, well, go ahead and pull yourself up a chair, pour yourself a bottle of that fine rat water, because in this video here, we discuss Episode 2, titled The Last Supper. Before I get into it, I just really want to get this out of the way. To be perfectly honest, you guys, I was not a fan of this episode. Compared to the previous part, the previous first part of the season premiere, this one just really fell flat. There was really not a whole lot that happened in this episode, but I will try my best to recap as much of the episode as possible to kind of paint a picture as to what the overall narrative is. At the start of the episode, Jesse is on the road and he ends up getting picked up by a chicken coop driver, or however you want to call this particular person. And the driver, of course, is asking him all these questions about where he's going, blah, blah, blah. And Jesse, in a sense, is truthful and upfront with her and basically saying that he's seen this vision of this rock, but he can't really point a finger as to what exactly this rock is. So he drew it out on a piece of paper and he handed it to the driver, asking her if she possibly could know what this particular rock is that he saw in his vision. And she said, "Oh yeah, I recognize that. That is actually in Australia." So Jesse gets the idea, okay, I need to hop on a plane to get from the Middle East to Australia to hunt down this rock, because obviously the vision that he had is somehow points to this rock being the gateway into him finding God. After Tulip tried blowing a hole in the front entrance door to Masada, Featherstone ends up somehow following her back, but ends up losing track of her, and she comes across this bar where she's talking to this guy named Khalid, and she's asking him the whereabouts of where Tulip is, which obviously he replies, "Oh, I don't know this woman. I have not seen her. I don't know what you're talking about." And as it turns out, Khalid is somehow working with Tulip because he relays information back to her and says that there's this woman that's looking for you, blah, blah, blah. And he's telling her, "Oh, I don't think it's a good idea for you to just leave for Masada and go through with this rescue of Cassidy." And Tulip basically tells him, "Come hell or high water, I'm going to get Cassidy out of there and nobody is going to stop me." Meanwhile, back at Masada, Cassidy is trying to figure out a way of breaking out of his prison cell, and he ends up, I believe, from what I've seen, he tried chewing through his foot to get himself out of his restraints. Somehow that ended up catching the attention of some of the guards, and he basically beats their asses down, I think kills them. Not sure if he just knocked them out or, well, I think he actually did kill them. But he ends up converging upon this pharmaceutical section in Masada, and he knocks out this guy and ends up taking his disguise. Well, as it turns out, this very room that he's in, there's a huge collection, or shall I say, a huge supply of drugs, and obviously this tickles Cassidy's fancy. And just when Cassidy gets his step towards freedom, when he gets closer to the exit of Masada and outside of the confines of his prison, well, temptation ends up setting in and he goes back to the very area where he found that precious supply, and he ends up getting coked up. And oh my god, I don't know what to think of this. I mean, I get it. Cassidy is a junkie. He obviously is going to cave into temptations, but this just came off to me as such a cheap, convenient plot point to somehow pull him back into his prison cell, because sure enough, he ends up getting caught by Frankie and thrown back into his cell. This just was, oh god, I don't know what to think of this. I think that there could have been another way that they could have somehow pulled Cassidy back in. I don't know. Or why not just have him leave? And back when Cassidy is in the torture chamber, Frankie tells the class that when someone is feeling a tremendous amount of guilt, they'll go back to being tortured because they feel that they have so much shame that they feel that they don't really have any self-worth, and therefore they should be tortured physically, mentally, what have you. I can understand where they were trying to go with Cassidy's mental state, but it just really does not make sense to me that he would want to prove himself to Jesse by escaping, only for him to somehow subconsciously think that he should go back to being tortured because of the guilt that he's felt from his past. This, to me, this just seems like a cheap way for the writers to make us feel sorry for Cassidy, because let me tell you something, there is going to be more revealed to Cassidy's backstory. And this, to me, the reason why they did this, or at least it seems evident to me, is that they're trying to make the audience feel sympathy for Cassidy, so that way when the inevitable bad side of his backstory is revealed, that the audience is not going to feel as bad towards Cassidy, or they're not going to hate Cassidy as much as they should, because they're just going to have their trying to play on that sympathy card. Meanwhile, also back at Masada, Hairstar is having a meeting with, I can only assume is like the Grail's version of the UN, where you have various representatives from all across the globe, and they're wanting to know what happened to Humperdew, or as they call him, the Holy Child. Or at least the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand is pressing Hairstar, wanting to know, where is the Holy Child? Is he going to be coming back anytime soon? What on earth has happened to him? And obviously Hairstar does not like the fact that the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand is pressing him on the whereabouts of the Holy Child. So to shut him up, he ends up ordering a few of the Grail members to have the Deputy Prime Minister sealed in a crate, but obviously before they seal him in there, they give him a hand grenade and they pull the pin on the hand grenade. So once when they've nailed him inside of the crate, well, poor Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand explodes. And right afterwards, Hairstar tells Featherstone to have his remains shipped away and put a communication out that it was Australia that orchestrated the death of the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand. One thing that I forgot to mention before is that as Jesse's out on the road with this other driver, they end up stumbling upon this child that's on the side of the road and appears to have a dead dog. I really don't understand what the point was of this scene, but so Jesse has the driver pull over so he could check on this child's well-being and find out what's going on. And as it turns out, the child was a thief, and I believe it's a she. The kid has long hair. Sorry if I'm misgendered, but I'm thinking this is a little girl. She ends up pulling a gun on Jesse and says, you know, give me your money, blah, blah, blah. And he uses the word on the child, and she drops the gun goes off, and ends up shooting the dog. And obviously feeling a sense of guilt, Jesse ends up giving the child all of his money in his wallet, and in turn the child wants his boots. And he's like, oh no, I'm not going to give up my boots. But then eventually he caved in and ended up giving her the boots. So now he's walking. And he ends up walking, I guess he walks all the way to the airport. And just as he gets to the airport and finds a pilot and is about to board a plane, well, it turns out he ended up leaving his lighter behind. And he realized that he left his lighter behind in that truck. And he noticed that the name on the truck was Jesus Desaad, blah, blah, blah. I can't exactly remember what the decal said, but I know it said Jesus Desaad. I've got a bone to pick with this scene. The lighter was used as a MacGuffin. And this is really irritating. I will get to this at some point in the video, but anyways, to go back, he realized he lost his lighter, so now he's got to find this household or wherever the whereabouts this truck ended up going to get his lighter back. And he ended up somehow teleporting. I don't know how he found the address or how he found the whereabouts, but anyways, he ended up getting back to Jesus Desaad's manor. And just as he gets his lighter back, the pilot guy said, oh, there was a child in the window. I think it was the same child that he ran into that took his money and his boots. But the pilot said, oh, we've got to get that child out. Or he's telling Jesse, hey, you're a preacher. You have a moral code. You should go get this child. I'm sorry, this scene was just... It was stupid. It was stupid. It was unnecessary because for some reason nothing came out of this, because Jesse ends up getting back on the plane to head to Australia anyways by the end of the episode. So this scene really made no sense to put in there. It's just really, really off. Then Tulip puts her plan into motion using her buddy Khalid. He contacts Featherstone and gives the so-called whereabouts of Tulip. And so she and a few other of the Grail members end up leaving Masada and end up on this goose hunt to try to look for Tulip. And I will admit, I really did like this scene. I liked how this whole pursuit for Tulip went down. And at the end of this scene, how they set it up is that it was Khalid that was in Tulip's car, and Tulip somehow managed to get her incognito costume on and managed to somehow get onto this ambulance to get her way back to Masada. And this was a pretty clever trick on Tulip's part, but I believe that's pretty much how the episode ends, is with Tulip going on her way to Masada in this ambulance. As I have stated before, I just was not a fan of this episode. I feel that nothing really of substance happened here. It seemed like as if the characters have ended up just where they have started. There really wasn't a whole lot of progress with this episode. The first episode was very solid, and they were running on all gears. And then in the second episode, on the other hand, everything just comes to a screeching halt. And as I said before, it just seems like there really wasn't much in terms of character progression, and there was a lot of conveniences to the plots to put these characters in spots where, to me, it should have progressed organically. Like I said, for instance, with Cassidy, it just doesn't really make any sense to have him decide, oh yeah, I'm going to prove my self-worth and prove to Jesse that I really don't need his help, only for him to end up screwing up. He gets put back into his cell, and it turns out he actually did want to be there because he felt incredibly guilty. I really don't like that. I will admit, there actually were a couple of scenes that I really did like in this episode. If I was to say anything positive about episode 2, and that would be, I really did like that scene with Jesse on the back of this Arab's camel, and the guy ends up getting into another fight with another Arab who turns out to be a Muslim. And I'm trying to remember what this guy said that he was. It wasn't Sikh or anything like that. I'm not sure if it was another religion. But anyway, so they end up getting into a fight. Jesse comes out and he tries to quell the fight, and he uses the word on them, but it just completely backfires, and both guys end up killing each other and their camels, or llamas. Camels, I think it is camels. But they both end up killing each other and their camels respectively, and this obviously made me laugh. This is the type of humor that I love on this show, and just what makes this show so great is just its oddball, off-the-wall humor. And as I said, I really, really like this scene, and it turns out it's because the reason why the one guy ended up shooting was because he didn't understand English, so obviously he was not going to know what Jesse was talking about. So, yeah, I will say I really, really did like that scene. I thought it was hilarious. And then I did like the scene between Tulip and Featherstone, the whole car chase scene, and Tulip, or what appears to be Tulip, it's either Tulip or Khalid. One of the two was kind of running rings and creating all this dust to try to throw off the Grail members. That scene I did like. I will admit, like I said, as much as I really disliked this episode, I did really enjoy those two scenes in particular. And then we get to the lighter being used as a MacGuffin. Now, I will make this clear. I am not a purist when it comes to adaptations. However, if you're going to adapt certain story arcs, I think you really need to be cautious as to how you adapt it, because the lighter in the comic is of significant importance to Jesse, and it was completely glossed over in the third season, and it was treated as an Easter egg for comic fans to get excited about. But to add some context to what I mean by that. Now, this might be considered a spoiler for the comic, although I'll bet a mild spoiler. But there is a backstory with Jesse's dad. See, now, Jesse's dad, John, was a Vietnam War vet. And as a token of his participation in the war efforts, he received this "fuck communism" Zippo. And he passed that Zippo on down to Jesse. So this particular object is of significant importance to Jesse. And as you can tell in the show, they never touched upon that backstory with John. And I think that that was a really huge mistake, especially considering the fact that they decided to somehow use the lighter for a plot point anyways. So why did they even omit Jesse's dad's backstory when, as I said before, that his backstory is of significant importance to the meaning of what that lighter meant to Jesse? With how they've introduced the lighter on the show fans are not going to understand the meaning of this lighter unless if they covered John's backstory, which obviously that didn't happen on the show. So only comic fans are going to understand why Jesse would go out of his way to go grab this lighter. And that concludes my review of the Preacher series finale season premiere. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are if you've seen both episodes, if you agree with me or if you disagree with me. Certainly feel free to leave a comment down below. And stay tuned because eventually I will be covering my review of episode 3 titled Deviant. And until next time, dear friends, this is Cynical Lindsay, signing off.